Hey photographers, joining me today is Paul Chato, who's the host of Science Tech Stand-Up. Science Tech Stand-Up. Funny guy. It's always nice to chat with Paul. Paul, welcome to, your virtual visit to my lonely log cabin on the 13th floor of YouTube headquarters.
It's nice to be here, Martin.
Always nice to have you join me. It's fun to get together and chat. It's
always good to talk with someone with two A's in their name,
isn't it?
right in a row.
I know. It's a Dutch thing, the multiplying up of the doubling up of vowels. Maybe it's a Scandinavian thing too. I'm not sure. Today I wanted to talk about some of the things that seem to frustrate photographers that I just don't, or my viewers anyway, that I just don't. I have trouble sympathizing, empathizing, understanding what it is that they're after. It's something like, let's take weather sealing to start. A lot of my viewers either misunderstand what weather sealing is, or else they are prepared to, because the camera doesn't have weather sealing, to just let it go completely. They'll say no weather sealing, fail. I think that's a little extreme, and maybe it's a misunderstanding of what the weather sealing in cameras actually offers.
You mean as a checkbox prior to choosing which camera that they want to purchase?
Yes, yeah.
I don't worry about weather sealing. I have that 1/4-inch foam with the peel off that you use for your windows, and I just stick that right on the lens.
Just the lens,
that seems to do the lens as I mash it into my Lumix, and it seems to do a fine job with weather sealing.
Right. I assume it adds some nice bokeh to your shots as well.
Oh, it does some very interesting things.
Yeah.
I'll tell you. With vignetting is quite severe, but
I can only imagine. But what you're suggesting is that there are lots of workarounds. I mean, even if your camera's not fully weather sealed, it's very easy to protect your camera. Either your assistant is holding an umbrella if you're in that tax
silicon
bracket.
sealant. Silicon sealant is also good, but you just have to pick the one lens you want to keep on that camera the entire life of that camera.
Gorilla Glue, for example.
Gorilla Glue's good too.
Yeah,
that's an interesting question.
That'll give you a good seal.
So how many times do you think you've needed your camera sealed in a situation? How many times have you found yourself in a wet situation?
That's kind of saying, how many times have I been on the Maid of the Mist under Niagara Falls?
Good question.
Right? I mean, that's kind of like the only situation that I can think of. I'm afraid that many people have the idea that cameras are not as rugged or robust as they really are. I mean, I think it's safe to take a camera to a beach. I think it's safe to take a camera out in the rain as long as it's not pouring. I mean, if you're getting soaking wet, then likely the camera's getting soaking wet too. And these are not good things. And you want to have a cloth, so maybe you can wipe the water off the lens, maybe wipe it a little bit off the body. But these are not things that I would stress over. I think that many people are much too concerned when they see that a camera doesn't have weather sealing about what the camera can actually withstand.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, unless you're shooting on the veldt in Africa and you get caught in a rainstorm, but you're shooting for National Geographic and you got to keep shooting, then I really don't understand the anxiety over weather sealing.
Right. Yeah, well, I'm 100% there. And what was interesting was there were a few years ago, I think it was I'll name them, Olympus provided some industry standard reference for how weather sealed their camera was. And we actually had videos on YouTube of people taking showers with the camera. Never mind.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right. And that just shows that all cameras will actually stand up to that pretty well. You don't want to go crazy. But the interesting thing about so it's So the standard is called IP, so ingression protection, and then it's followed by two numbers. And the first number indicates the protection against water coming into the body, and the second number is the number for dust coming into the body. Well, the camera in question had a rating of IP1X. So X indicates that there's no rating for that. So it had 0 protection against dust. And 1 is the absolute basic minimal. It's like, would be okay if it was foggy kind of thing. Because the IP standards are used by the industry that makes closed-circuit television cameras for security monitoring that are placed outside. So those cameras need heavy-duty protection against all kinds of situations. So first of all, it was kind of ridiculous to apply that to a consumer camera that's not in a locked-off situation outside somewhere. But it also seemed like they didn't even meet the most basic version of that. And then, viewers would attack me saying, yes, but this camera has IP1X. And I'm going, you don't understand what IP means at all. But just back to the point that they're just too concerned about this in a way that they shouldn't need to be.
Well, there's two parts to that. Number one is, are they really willing to test the IP value of their camera?
Of course not. Why would they?
So for instance, my G9 and the lenses I have are all water sealed. But if I get caught out in the rain, I stick my coat over my camera and my lenses.
That's what we all do.
I just, that's my instinct. I have no interest in trying the full weather sealing capability of my camera. And for no other reason than if you've ever had to get all the water out of the moving parts of your lens, it's a bugger.
Right.
Like trying to wick all that water out from under and around those all the moving parts. I mean, it's nuts.
Don't you just put in a bag with rice? Isn't that the solution when something's wet and you want to dry it out? Isn't that the...
Only when I'm cooking my camera.
Do you have recipes for that?
Yeah, I do. It's some very nice Chinese recipes for my camera. I don't
recipes, know.
Right. Like you mentioned rice. Well, rice is common in the region.
It is, yes.
No, I've never thought of putting my camera in rice. But I also have a UV-ish filter on the front of my lens, so it's easier to get the water off it. Right. So that's a question that I've always wanted to ask you, and maybe you can ask your other cohorts online, is what percentage of them actually have lens protection, and how many of them think that affects the quality of the photography.
But
that's a different that's a different discussion. But that's interesting that you've got a really hardcore audience of very technical people that want certain features in their cameras, and weatherproofing is one of them. And it's not the reason I bought this camera. It's a nice to have.
Right. And as cameras get more expensive, I think it's one of the marketing things that brands use to get you to step up to the next level. Now, obviously, the top-of-the-line cameras from Nikon, Sony, Canon all have way better durability, reliability, construction, all of those things. And I think that weather protection just comes along as part of that package, that a rugged, reliable, durable camera, you're going to go for the top of the line, and it is going to do that. It is, you're going to be in the Antarctic at -40, and your camera's still going to fire up, even though that's probably outside the specs for any camera.
You're shooting sports, outdoors, right. Soccer. If you're a wildlife photographer, you're going to be caught in situations where you're going to need those features.
But that's why they sell those lovely plastic jackets that you put on your camera. There's lots of rain gear and wet protection. True. To even take your camera underwater if that's what you'd like to do. Anyway.
So are you saying that in the mid-range camera format, people are going a little bit crazy with the weather sealing checkbox?
Yes, I think they're overly concerned about something
Okay.
that likely isn't going to. So
So
okay, so
that's the
that
point.
can
Okay.
I put that topic aside? Are we
Okay, next topic.
next? Stabilization.
Right.
Like again, it's it's off my list. It doesn't have stabilization, and I'm going really like you don't own a tripod. You couldn't up the ISO another stop or two. You can't buy a lens that has a wider aperture. That really is this otherwise fabulous camera that clearly is has top of the list features, but the one thing it doesn't have is stabilization, or it has only optically stabilized lenses, doesn't have in-body stabilization, and that's the reason that you're going to totally dismiss this camera from a purchase that you would consider. It just
So
doesn't.
that's, go ahead.
No, it just doesn't seem to make sense to me. I don't. It's
Well,
not that important.
I never had IBIS in any of my old film cameras, and I did fine.
Yes, well, we can name a long list of photographers from the Lumiere brothers to, Gary
Stieglitz.
Winograd, Cartier-Bresson, whoever, Karsh. It doesn't matter. They didn't have stabilization because it's a fairly new feature. They didn't even have optical stabilization for the lens, and yet, those remain some of the most interesting, valuable photographs that are revered and Ansel Adams respected around the world, and yet they were able to shoot without those features. But
IBIS is an interesting feature. I think for me,
I will
it
not
was
say that word,
really.
first of all.
Sorry, I'm not allowed to say that.
You may say it, but I'm not going to.
Image body, image whatever
In-body?
stabilization, in body image stabilization. To me, it's really useful for video.
Wow. Whoa. I love that one. Go ahead.
Because one, I'm not interested in a gimbal, and I'm not interested in a gimbal look. I do like a bit of shaky cam, but controlled shaky cam. I love the natural, how naturally you can shoot something, so the camera is very invisible in terms of making a scene work dramatically in a certain way. And a gimbal just makes it a floaty mess. I'm not a big fan of that look. So I have worked with professional cameramen who we called, Steve the Steadicam, because he was so steady with the camera without any kind of stabilization. It was extraordinary, the stuff that he could do, just his physical capabilities, his attributes. So for me, video is and the only other place where in-body image stabilization has been useful is with long lenses.
Right.
I'm actually shocked at how steady, how useful long lens can become without a tripod. But using it to try to shoot at 1 second because of light, and you want to keep it at 1.8 aperture and all that stuff, I think that's garbage. I think that's complete nonsense.
And certainly there's some value for stills in all kinds of stabilization features, including in-body. For the most part, long zoom lenses don't have very large apertures, so a little bit of boost is helpful, although my personal preference would be to go with a little higher ISO. But the main value that I see in camera stabilization is while you're composing the shot. Otherwise, when I'm fully zoomed in on something at 400 or higher, it's next to impossible to hold the camera still enough so that I can compose the shot exactly the way I want. And optically stabilized lenses really provide a benefit for that. But let me go back to your point about video. And sorry, is it gimbal or gimbal? I never know.
Gimbalry. That's where we took our kids when they were small.
Oh, okay, to help them be more stable on
Yeah, whatever.
uneven
Yeah, good. I like
surfaces. Yeah.
that.
Okay.
Nice, good
Yeah.
connection there.
So, anyway, I mean, I like the look of a gimbal, but I understand where you're going with that. It does have a very artificial, floaty look. Although, look, oh, sorry, what's his name? Cowan, the guy who was the ice dancer, who's now an on ice photographer for figure skating.
Oh,
The
okay.
work that he does, and it's all Steadicam. Sorry, it's all gimbal driven. Is amazing. The stuff that he creates quite spectacular. But all of that aside, you can't expect an in-camera stabilization system to provide anything close to that, to allow you that kind of movement, to allow you to walk.
No,
to
but it's
allow you-
different.
but
No,
but what it
I
will
agree.
do, but what it will do is allow you to, at least when you're taking a shot and you're standing there and you're trying to keep it steady because you're panning back and forth, or you're just in one spot, then it will add some benefit to that shot. But the drawback always is, and camera manufacturers are working with this now, the drawback always is that if you have a stable and steady shot and then you try to pan off slightly, the stabilization tries to hold the original shot. It doesn't realize that you're actually trying to pan, so that as you start to move, suddenly it jumps. Which is why you
It
turn it
depends
off
on
when
the
you're
it
on
depends
the
on the
tripod.
lens. It can be very lens dependent, and the wider the lens, the worse that effect is.
Right, and lenses are
Effect
better at
is.
this than in-camera stabilization. The lenses will generally cope with that in a much more fluid way, in a much more natural or organic way than the digital, in-camera stabilization, which nearly
Well,
inevitably, as you start to move, there's a little jump.
Well, there's two kinds of in camera. There's the processed digital stuff, and the one where they're actually shaking the
Yep.
the image sensor.
Right.
So,
Yes, where the image
yeah.
sensor itself is on a little vibrating
Right.
gimbal-like thing.
Yeah, I haven't found with the G9 any kind of soupy, moist, mushy kind of edge bending.
Now we're talking about rolling shutter,
No,
which is
I'm
another
talking
thing
about.
that viewers.
Let's
I
get
think,
on to rolling shutter,
You know-
because we don't want to spend all our time on one topic.
Right.
Next topic.
All right, next topic. Well, actually, I thought crop, but let's do rolling shutter, because that too, although I think that the importance of this too, I mean, I think most photographers now recognize that that's not something that they need to be all that concerned about. That, once you know exactly what it is and how it works, and you do the little zippy pan and demonstrate how good or bad, most cameras aren't very good at this, you realize that you actually never have that shot. So in the early days of digital video cameras, certainly there was a lot of rubber, really weird bendy stuff happening
Sure.
if objects or you moved while shooting video. But I think those days are pretty much behind us. And I don't think many people take shots, even if they're moving shots, where rolling shutter is visible on virtually any sort of interchangeable lens camera that you buy today. Is that?
And I think I agree with you. And I'd like to add one other thing, is that most people who are shooting video with their cameras really don't know anything about panning as it relates to your frames, as your FPS, as your like 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second. You have limits as to how fast you can pan at those frame rates. People don't know that.
Right.
So they do some massive fast zoom at 24 frames a second and it looks like garbage. But you have, and there are lookup tables and calculators and things like that will tell you how fast you are allowed to pan at those frame rates.
Well, without getting weird artifacts.
But in terms of making it look smooth and not jumpy.
Right. Well, or that there's just way too much blur. Is really
So
what it amounts
to so your concern with this is another checkbox item that cameras need to have brilliant, steady non-jello-y pans?
No. I think that's up to the cinematographer. I'm not sure that that's up to the camera. And you're right. You need to know what your camera is capable of, and you don't want to push beyond that limit.
Well, not many YouTubers have cinematographers that travel with them.
That's true, but I think the overall understanding of cinematography by those people who are creating videos for YouTube is increasing. I think we're all more aware of some of those aspects and some of those details. I think in general, that's a good thing.
I think YouTube saved the camera industry. As dire as things are, without YouTube, I think things would be worse.
That's undoubtedly true. So then last thing is crop. And the number of people who seem to be upset that when the camera switches to video mode, it crops in slightly. And again, that's something I don't understand. Can you not take a step back? Is it like, do you really have in your mind, this is what a 35 millimeter lens should look like for this shot, and now it's upsetting you that it's cropping in 10%? I just, it seems like such an odd thing to complain and to worry about.
So that's another item your audience is complaining about.
Yeah,
They're bitchy about
video crop.
Video crop.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Well, first of all, any camera's going to crop when it goes from video, because you're going from 4:3 or 3:2 to 16:9. So right away you're going to lose top and bottom. Hopefully that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about the fact that the image then crops down slightly, and there's an easy technical explanation here, which is that the camera manufacturer wants to have as simple a process for reducing a 24 megapixel image down to 8 megapixels that's required for even 4K video. So
and I think the large megapixel cameras like the R5 have issues with cropping, correct?
Of course
because
they do.
They're starting with 40 plus megapixels, and they've got to somehow manage how to get down to 1080p or 4K or whatever.
Right. All has to be binned and mathematically sampled and all those other things. So what just changing the number slightly mean is that they have an exact mathematical model to work with, so that it's,
because I think you only need 8K for
that's
you only
exactly
need an 8 megapixels
for 4K.
For a 4K for 4K, right? No, that's not a lot.
No, and somehow if you've got 24 megapixels, you've got to sample it out, and you want those formulas that are used to be ones that are easy to work with, ones that don't require some odd, combination of pixels. So by limiting the area of the sensor to one that is exactly mathematical multiple of your video resolution, that seems to me to be good practice. If that requires
I disagree. I paid for 24 goddamn megapixels, and I want to use all of them. I don't want to someone cropping into only the 8 megapixel part of my
no. There's no
sensor.
camera that does that. That would be ridiculous.
Okay. I just wanted to know, because I was getting very verklempt there.
Interesting point. There are some full frame cameras that have a Super 35 mode that actually does do a sensor crop, but none of them crop down to only the center 1920 by 1080 or 3840 by whatever the numbers are to get, none of them are that
some reviewers have showed that the ones that shoot it large and then shrink them down provide extra sharpness to that particular format.
Well, yes, as long as the formula that's used is one that's mathematically makes sense. There's no good. There's no value in trying to cram 6 pixels, 6 original pixels here, and then the next pixel over in your 4K video, you're trying to only cram 4 in. I mean, mathematically, those are just ridiculous things to try to accomplish.
So your point, once again, is that there are people who are bugged by the fact that their camera does a crop when they're in video. And I agree with you in the sense that almost all cameras over the last 5 years are doing such an amazing number of different things for you.
Right.
And so I guess your point is people are complaining way too much compared to the capabilities that these cameras actually offer.
Right. And that's, I guess, the basis of the thesis and a good point to conclude on. So thank you for keeping this conversation on track. That's appreciated. Yes, that we're concerned about things that are really either issues that we don't understand very well, like the crop thing or the weather sealing, or issues that aren't really very relevant or important in terms of your overall everyday use of the camera. Is that fair? Is that?
I completely agree, but how many people succumb to the marketing and feel completely emasculated unless they have the camera? And I can point to several people who asked me my advice as to what camera they should buy, and they didn't go with what I suggested. They had to go full frame because that was it. And now, in both those cases, these massive camera systems, and both of these people are quite well off, so they could afford it. They're in closets.
Yep, that's what happens.
So, how many cameras, expensive cameras, are there? Are in closets right next to the Fender Stratocaster that you were certain you were going to
play.
Take up. You're going to play.
Yeah,
you bought it. You bought the signature version, not the crappy knockoff, because you were going to play the Eric Clapton signature version to become a guitarist, and it's right next to your Sony A7S III.
Right. Yes. Well, it's unfortunate. I'm not going to stop people from buying more camera than they need, or more bicycle that they need, or more car than they need, or more peanut butter than they need. No, that one of these things is not like the other. Anyway, thanks for stopping by today. It's always interesting chatting with you, and my viewers know what to do. Civil comments, relevant questions, and I'll answer them all. Thanks for your time today. Always nice chatting.
No problem. We didn't put a bow on the ibis.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. Maybe you can do that in the comments or something. Well, what do people think about the importance of it, and how do they use it, or how have they found that it's become useful to them? That they bought it as a marketing tool, but then maybe they found a different way that makes it useful for them. That's different from what's promoted.
Something I've not anticipated. Great. Well, let's hear that in the comments. Thanks for watching. Stay safe.